are at 100. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Global Citizens. My name is Calvin. I am the show's host, and of course, I am also its creator. So, as the introduction said, I am finally at my 100th episode. After 2 years, I think at least 4 times, whereby I lose all of my signal sometimes, or I lose a lot of sleep, definitely. It's finally get to 100. So without further ado, we will just jump in with my group of panelists here. So some of them has already appeared here before, so you guys are familiar with them. So there's also some new faces that's gonna give their own opinions today. So yeah, this is something that, well, we're just gonna have a little fun with it. So with that, this is going to be the first question, and unlike the typical style whereby I will just ask you guys some of the questions, we will have a more open-ended panel style. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to ask is definitely without further ado, and that is home. Back when you guys were kids, and now that you guys are adult TCKs, what have you always imagined how it is supposed to be? Like, do you guys have an opinion about it? And also, along with that, how should we be defined by it? Should we let our personal backgrounds be the one that define us, or we choose to define ourselves based on all of the homes that we have ever lived? So with that, let's just start. Okay, any minute now, guys. Any minute.
Okay, I mean, I guess I can share like what I personally think home is for me. And for me, I actually don't really attach it to like a location, but rather just like how I feel in it. And that might be connected to a lot of other people's responses. But essentially what I mean is that when I go to a new place, I really feel home when I can, for example, use the resources there in terms of if I'm comfortable in approaching people, if I'm comfortable in going out, if I am able to do all the stuff that I would be able to do in a place where essentially I grew up or I'm comfortable with. So in terms of my home, like it really depends on how comfortable I am in the situation. And yeah, basically it's more of an emotion and feeling for me rather than a location-based perspective. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'll jump on that too. By the way, Calvin, good to see you, brother. Nice to meet all you guys too, except Daniel, right? No, I know Daniel, but yeah, kind of jumping on that. It's kind of funny. I was thinking about this question, and it always seems to change, even now. When I was a kid, home was always where I wasn't. Does that make sense? Like when we first moved to Hong Kong, home was Chicago, right? And I missed that place. And then when I came back to the States for college, home was Taipei, right? And then because I'd been there so long, and then when I was back here a while, I moved different states, and home was always like the North Carolina. It was always where it wasn't. And that's kind of an interesting way, to see it. But the more, I think kind of just what you were saying, but now it's more of a feeling, right? I'm the old guy of the group, so I guess I can talk on that. But now it's more, to me, home isn't necessarily like you just said. It's not a physical place anymore. It's where my wife is. It's more of a feeling. It's where people are that I love and love me right back. And so it can be anywhere and nowhere at the same time, right? So, and that's kind of how my interpretation is anyway. But yeah, loaded question. I love it.
So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about what you guys were saying, and I was realizing that like the main thing for me is because my first thought was like, I don't even know, like, can I even associate that feeling? Because I don't know if I know. But then I was realizing that the place I feel the most at home with is just anywhere you are most comfortable to be yourself. And that can be the product of all your influences and cultures and your life experiences. But if you are comfortable being that and you don't feel like an alien being that or being yourself, I think is the most important aspect of anywhere that you can feel at home. But that's me. So basically I'm saying, Ben, you're wrong.
Get used to this, by the way. We're gonna go back and forth.
Yeah, I think pretty much what everybody's laid out. It's funny because I feel both ways, or felt both ways throughout my experiences as an expat, or not just an expat, but just having lived in a few countries, even past childhood. I'll give an example, and I gave this example to Calvin before. It's like, when I was in Boston, I was pining for KL. When I was in KL, I was pining for Boston. Yep. So I think that kind of like encapsulates the TCK conditions to some degree, where you feel like you belong to both places, but it's like, you miss one aspect of the other place when you're in that other place on the other side of the pond, or the Pacific in this case. So, but at the end, I think what it boils down to is, definitely it's your emotional attachment to those places, which fundamentally makes them your home. And I think, I think if I go all the way back to the near beginning of my life, was when I first made my first move out of my home country. Because initially I was Indonesian, like Calvin. I was born in Jakarta. So, when my mom remarried, and the first place we moved to was India. So we lived in Mumbai. So obvious culture shock at first, but I think what eventually made me adapt to the place, and it grew on me as I grew on it, however you like to look at it, were the things that made it familiar to me across the board. And that was obviously language at first, because, you could get by with English over there. So I think, provided I was able to speak in a language I was comfortable with at that time, enabled me to eventually adapt to that place. So that's always a gateway, at first, just some degree of familiarity, and then from there you begin to explore the unfamiliar, and you become a part of the unfamiliar as well. So yeah, that's home. It became home, and I miss India.
Yeah, when I was younger, I used to think that home was like Ben was saying, where
You're
I
still
wasn't.
young, Trish. You're still a lot younger than all of us.
As
I'm
the
sure
way,
I've got 2 shirts older than you, Trish. Yeah.
By the way, she cheated all of us before the beginning of the recording, guys.
No, I didn't.
I'm just gonna put it there.
Unintentionally. Yeah, so
Sure.
I would be missing Singapore, where I spent my early years, or Philippines, where my family's from, after immigrating to Canada. And I kind of struggled with that a lot. Like when people would say, "So where's home?" Sometimes I would say, it's the city where I am in Winnipeg. This is my home, even though I didn't feel 100% that was where home was. But as I am getting older, I'm like, home is I'm an emotion. It's it's wherever the people I love are, wherever they are in the world, even if they're on the opposite side. And yeah, I'm also planning to move eventually to another city in Canada. So home for me is emotion right now, and I'm learning to accept that and move forward, defining home as that.
Right.
So there's a question.
You're on mute. Yeah. Oh, there.
Sorry, I missed that. My internet's horrible today. Sorry.
No worries.
I think it's interesting that you've all sort of touched on feelings of comfort, because for me, home is the exact opposite of that. Because I grew up on a boat, I was kind of within the space I was growing up, constantly being sick, constantly being homeschooled. So that wasn't really a comforting feeling. And then off of the boat, I was in South America, where none of my family spoke the language, and I was trying to learn, but not doing a great job. But I kind of sort of got comfortable being comfortable and not understanding anything. So now I kind of seek out spaces where I don't understand things. And for me, that's the most comforting thing. So I love going to my local Asian food shop, even though I know what nothing is. I can't read any of the labels, but I like to sort of figure out what things are just through context and visual cues. Yeah, home can be anywhere as long as I'm uncomfortable.
It's like a calming chaos. I love it. Yeah, because I can relate to that. So, yeah.
I actually want to jump in a little bit on that. On where you feel the most uncomfortable. Do you guys ever feel that the places where you guys are most uncomfortable at, maybe you have lived in it, or maybe because of work, you guys spend an extended period amount of time in it, is where you guys actually grow up the most?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, like using India as an example initially, I'll be. I mean, I was I was like what 6 years old. Of course, first 6 months I hated it. Uh, I wanted to go back to KL or Jakarta, just whatever I was familiar with. But funny enough, that changed relatively quickly for a kid that age. But I guess that makes sense. When you're that age, that's the time that you adapt quickly, And just less than a year on, it was just it became pretty much woven into the fabric of my being in a sense. It's like, and I think right now looking back, some of the best years of my life as a child was in India. I feel very nostalgic for it. And every time I look at something on TV which reminds me of Mumbai, I'm like I get misty eyed, and there's a sense that I just want to spend at least another year there, maybe when I'm on sabbatical, to just reconnect with that part of my childhood which I treasure, and I think in some sense being in India pretty much mapped out what I became, what I was as a TCK or as a global citizen. If it weren't for that experience, I wouldn't be the way I am now in terms of my frame of mind and my point of view of the world. So I'm grateful for that experience. I think everybody needs to go through an uncomfortable, phase in their life, because that's what opens you up. It's got to be done and connects you with everybody. Yeah.
One of the interesting things, at least for me, is that so when I grew up in Indonesia 14 years, and then I moved to the US, and then people were confused about my identity, and then they assumed, some of them, they tried to just like find an answer, and they said, well, you lived 14 years in Indonesia, obviously that's where you're from. And I was like, well, nothing teaches you that you're not Indonesian like growing up as an expat in Indonesia, you have that bubble, and you realize that there are huge cultural differences and some things that you'll never understand, even though you grew up there, And one thing that actually, even though Indonesia has a big place in my heart, I didn't go back there for many years later. I ended up feeling at home in Switzerland later on. And then the experience of living in Switzerland for an extended time, by the time I got back to Jakarta, I was both delighted and slightly horrified by the way that some things were very nostalgic, and I was very happy to have that again. Some things I was like, ooh, yes, I've changed. I don't fit into this as neatly as I might have 10 years ago. So the length of time is not the automatic determinant. It's also because you're always changing. It's not always about your childhood. So that's
Yeah, it's my experience is a little kind of backwards in the sense that the place that like Tony, I moved to Hong Kong when I was 6.5, and so I was in Chicago at the time, but I'm originally from Idaho here in the States, and living in Chicago, that was great, but I didn't know any different, right? And when you move overseas, just like Tony kind of hinted at, you're that age, you didn't know if you were moving like I was moving to Hong Kong, but it might as well have been Iowa or Florida. It didn't matter, as long as there were other kids my age, it didn't really make sense at that time. But the place that I actually struggled with the most, ironically, was moving back to the States. As a guy that grew up 10 years of my life, so I was 6.5 when we moved overseas, and then I was 17-ish when I came back for college. I would come back in the summers, but my brother and I would just hang at grandparents' house or family members' house. We were American trying to be American, right? So we would go to the malls and we would do all that stuff thinking we were big time, and we had no idea what the hell we were doing. So, but when I came back to the States, I went to school in North Carolina, and it's great state, great people, all that, but I felt so out of place. And and then I thought it was just me, because I had other friends that did the same thing. They came back to the States for college and university, and it was back then, it was just kind of it was a taboo topic. Nobody talked about that they were struggling, so to speak, right? So I thought it was me. I just thought I was the only one going through this, and so I just kept my mouth shut. But it was, here I am, a 6'2" white guy, thinking that I looked the part. I'm supposed to fit the part, but intrinsically, man, I was miserable. And still to this day, there are moments where I feel so out of place stateside. I mean, Calvin knows this, but I and so does Daniel. I went back to Shanghai for work a couple of years back, and right before I left, I think I've told this story before, but I broke my arm a couple months before I moved, and I had gotten the cast off, I think a week before I was supposed to go to Shanghai. And I was in the doctor's office, and the nurse came in to take the cast off, and she's like, "Oh, what's new with you?" Just trying to small talk it. And I just remember and this is 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So I was definitely a grown adult, but she was saying that. I'm like, "Well, I'm moving." She's like, "Oh, where are you moving to? Montana, Colorado?" I'm like, "No, Shanghai, China." And she looked at me like, "No, seriously, where are you moving to?" And I'm like, "No, really." And she's like, "Why would you want to do that?" She's, "Aren't you scared?" I'm like, "Why would I not?" Like, to me, it was a homecoming, right? And I got off the plane. It was that humidity hits you smack in the face, and it was like, like I could breathe again. But yeah, that's the irony of growing up outside your quote unquote home passport country, right? I actually felt I've been back 20 plus years, but it's taken a long time to kind of acclimate. I feel comfortable obviously in the States, but there's still a huge side of me that I'm more Asian than anything. It's one of those things. I feel more comfortable overseas than sometimes than I do here in the States. So
I actually really like the point that you mentioned, Ben, where it's like we often feel, actually, to be honest, quite foreign in actually the place that we were ethnically from.
Yeah.
So, for example, for me as well, my parents are Chinese, but every summer when we go back to China, I still feel like as much as a foreigner as anyone else.
Yeah.
And I feel, in comparison, when I'm back in Europe, like, that's kind of where I know my people, know where everything is at, I feel comfortable and so on. But it's just so ironic that there's a much bigger difference in terms of feeling a sense of belonging and what we feel is right when it comes to being the country where we were ethnically from. And I feel like this kind of has to do with the things that other people tell you. So, for example, because I am Chinese originally, some people might just put labels on that, and that would kind of influence me to think about it and then kind of disassociate myself from that. And somehow in my mind, like, it becomes that I'm much more different in China compared to anywhere else because of the labels that people put, or because of the assumption that people think I am from that place. And that makes a much more bigger distance compared to where I am not ethnically from.
Mhm.
So that was just an interesting point that I was thinking about. Yeah.
Like, maybe a lot of the pressure that comes from repatriation, like our passport country, just comes from those local expectations of, oh, you look like me, so you must think like me and behave like me. And then especially if you're moving there later in life, when you've already learned all of the social cues of like everywhere else, you have no idea, no frame of reference for what's going to happen. Like, I remember when I was moving back to the UK, I was 14, and I knew like it was going to be a bit tricky to adjust, so I was trying to train myself to be British by watching films. I was watching this movie called Nowhere Boy, which is young John Lennon's story, and he's talking with a Scouse, like, Liverpool accent. And I moved to a town that's just outside of Manchester, which is like mortal enemies with Liverpool. Like, don't talk with a Liverpool accent in Manchester. It did not go down well. My first day of high school, I had to relearn whole new accent.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Boys.
It's funny.
Thing is something. Oh, sorry. Dan. Yeah.
No, I was just thinking because both Sarah's and Ben's and Wei Rong's stories like resonate in the sense that like when I was growing up, especially as like one of the few American kids in a British school in Indonesia, like I felt extra pressure to like represent America. Not always, not from anyone else, just for myself. And then every time we went back to the US, much like Ben, I would hang around with my family, my extended family, not really acclimatizing to America. And And but even then, like, we are a Vietnamese family, so it's like even then, like, even it's I was never gonna get a good impression of like what America's really like without that. And then so going back with that assumption, what was extra interesting was moving back to America as an adult. I was also confronted with like what Asian and American identity is, and like the way ethnic and let's say identity is handled in the U.S. And then I came in as an outsider, but not really, because I was born there, my family's from there, and it was just like, but I was coming in from Asia, and and then even within, let's say, the Asian American community, there were expectations of what they call like fresh off the boat, FOB. At the time, they would say like, okay, well, you're not that Americanized, but you are. And with me, they were just confused. And I have learned to thrive in that confusion. I don't know about the rest of you, but yeah.
Calming chaos, man. I keep going back to it.
Yeah. Just like going off of that. So my experience was the way I never like repatriated back to the Philippines, which was my first passport country. My family and I ended up becoming citizens of Canada, maybe like I think 2007. So my experience though, I kind of still felt like the foreignness of like trying to be like from my parents' home country and technically my home country too. My high school experience, there's a big majority of Filipinos where I live in Winnipeg. So I didn't feel too like apart from my my home culture, but there's definitely times where I was like I don't really fit in with the Filipinos like that I grew up with, but I also didn't feel Canadian. So I struggled so much with that growing up. But yeah, like as I discovered like my roots again, especially this year, after all like the Asian hate kind of thing that was going on last year. I learned to like just, be comfortable in the chaos of what my identity is and accept it, and learn to kind of cultivate people in my life who were like, oh, okay, that's a bit strange, but I accept you. Like come in, or they're open-minded. So yeah, like I think I'm most uncomfortable when people are not like are closed-minded to the to the idea that people can have complex identities. And but I also do try to like I do have friends who are like that, but they're also willing to like learn more and like kind of think away from that mindset. So yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just want to jump in a little bit on what Trish says on the recent Asian hate things. The thing is this. What do you guys feel is the impact that TCK can bring for the upcoming generation? Holy shit, that sounds so old. Okay. So the reason why I said that is that when I actually was like a few episodes pending to the 100, one of my guests actually had his kids watching it live at a separate room. I saw their recording. They are really, really young. I think they're twins. They are both 4 years old. So it got me thinking, it's like, okay, I usually just let all my guests, if they need to curse, by all means curse. But the thing is that now I realize, okay, we can influence the younger generations. And the thing is that that's the reason why every single time now, like all my solo guests, I like to ask, do you guys have kids who are really young? The reason being is that I want this thing to be a sort of like a safe haven of sort of them for them to actually realize when they start questioning their cultural identity, when they start asking, so where am I actually from, that they actually have some people who can be a reference to them. I mean, most of them will typically start asking this at a teenage years, but the thing is that if they can ask at a really young age, then I need to be a little bit careful on that. So yeah, what do you guys feel though TCK could influence to the upcoming generation?
I mean, just like something that popped into my mind when you mentioned TCK's impact during this Asian hate period. And I feel like we actually have a lot to give from our side, because being third culture kids, being multicultural, we can look at these global issues in many different perspectives. And that's actually like a really, really good benefit, because we can take ourselves in the position of, for example, Americans or Canadian, and try to see why they are looking at it from that perspective, and in what way we can communicate to them in not changing their perspective, but letting them see what we see from another perspective. I'm using perspective so many times. What's the other word for it? Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that we as TCKs have actually a really, really big strength here by amplifying our voice through our multicultural background and using it for something good. And of course, like, you don't have to be a TCK to do that, but it's just the added benefit that we have on growing up in these different environments and using that for the good. Yeah, so that's my take on it. So I definitely do think we can provide powerful impact from our experiences.
So I was thinking in terms of like what we're all saying is of course important and everything, but what I was thinking as well was that one of the great journeys of everybody's life as they get older or they become an adult is that journey of self-discovery, learning who you are. And this is why TCKs kind of have a harder time with identity crisis, because I think when they hit adulthood, it's like, who am I? And for TCKs, it's like extra like, whoa, who am I? I don't know. And but that experience of questioning yourself, and then also sort of abandoning your preconceived notions of who you're supposed to be, because I think all of us have probably gone through a time when you were thinking like, okay, people tell me I'm this, but I don't know if I am, or this is what I always thought I was, but I'm not sure anymore. And then eventually you reach a point where you're comfortable with yourself, you know who you are, and you don't, it doesn't have to bother you so much what everyone around you says or thinks about you. And I think that's we have a greater capacity to teach that to younger generations. And speaking as a teacher now as well, like I feel like there's so many struggles that are universal to the human experience, that in a way our TCK experience with identity crisis and that sort of a identity, like figuring yourself out, is something that's just like pretty personal and something that's easy to pass down. It's easy for people to understand and say like, oh yeah, you grew up in multiple countries, obviously you're going to be complicated. And then we had the privilege to say, yeah, and so are you. Even if you grew up in one place, you're also figuring stuff out just like everybody else is. And I think we have that unique privileged position to do so.
I just shortly add something to something you mentioned, Daniel, and it's that I was just thinking of why it's so hard for TCKs in terms of identity and figuring ourselves out. And it's just that I feel like society is just so pinned down to categorizing everything and making it into one thing. So like if your parents are Chinese, then that means you're Chinese. It doesn't matter where else you were from or what other experiences you had. And I feel like that's what is really the problem, where humans have this, problem of always pinning down that it's either this or that. It can't be a mix. And children are taught this from a very young age as well. And then you have this growing mindset from when you were small to right now, adulthood, where you still feel like I only have to decide one. Like there's no possibility that it's a mix. And so I feel like a first step is to recognize that it's normal to be a mix. I can be Chinese, I can be Hungarian, I can be also Austrian, and that's completely fine, right? And I feel like making this awareness and putting it in a positive light, instead of it saying, oh, it's so complicated, like you have so many challenges, sure, but it's also an identity itself. Like it's one thing as well. It could be one thing instead of it being super complicated. So I think creating awareness to TCKs and TCK kids and young adults that it's completely fine for you to be a mix. And as Dan mentioned, a monoculture kid could as well be as complicated as a multicultural kid. So there shouldn't be really a big difference compared to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and just jumping off that, like I think just as humans, biology, we like to put people and things into categories, so we easily label. That's like innately like what makes us human. But there comes a point, like as a person, where you gotta like sometimes understand and realize that there's so much more that goes on in like what consists of an identity, because you can have multiple, like you said. And yeah, and I think just in reference to like TCKs and like trying to understand who they are, just helping out with Third Culture Kid Global the past, I think, 4-5 years now, and seeing the community grow, especially on like on Instagram, on Facebook. There's so much TCKs sharing their experiences, which is like amazing, because I've met many like young TCKs who are so knowledgeable about like what they're going through, like the phases and like the seasons that they go through. And it's been really great to see them like find that support, whether it's through an online community or meeting another third culture kid in person, or just exploring the identity. It's been really great to see that, especially with how connected the world has become over the last few years.
I'm gonna ride on the heels of that from from the perspective of a filmmaker. And I think, you know, one way to really get the message across is through the language of pop culture. You know, that's what got me into connected with the rest of the world at a young age. You know, obviously it started off with you know, a lot of Hollywood films. You know, particularly Spielberg. You know, because having grown up in the '80s, you know, that's and funny enough, that's what got me a lot of my English initially. And as I was you know, sponging it up at a young age, because my first language was Indonesian, was just watching a lot of English language films, you know. And but gradually, as I got more and more exposed to other cultures, as I lived in more countries, you know, then obviously I picked up a lot from Bollywood films when I was in India, you know. And then moving back to the East Asian region, you know, a lot of Hong Kong films, you know, informed my language as well, my language of the world, you know. And then eventually, you know, when I became a teenager, formative years, and I got exposed to the cinema of Wim Wenders and you know, all these, you know, transnational, you know, intercultural films, which basically sought to break the boundaries between countries and languages, you know, by telling these universal stories which cut across, you know, nations and ethnicities, you know. So that really informed, you know, what I wanted to do as a filmmaker as well, you know. So I think especially now in the streaming age, you know, with Netflix and all, it's like those boundaries are gradually beginning to break away, you know, like Netflix acquisitioning all this content from India and Spain and so forth, making them accessible to Americans and Europeans. And for example, like, you know, I've, you know, in Germany, you know, so many millennials in Germany, they're so much into anime and K-pop and so forth, you know. So it's like, it's almost the reverse of me. Like back then, it was me being informed by a lot of Western pop culture. Now you see a lot of that happening in reverse, you know, with a lot of young, you know, Westerners being really informed by Eastern pop culture, you know. So I think, you know, the arts and entertainment is a really viable way of just, you know, getting everybody connected, and just of a way of delivering that message that, look, guys, you know, we're more, we're a lot more familiar than you like to think, you know, and even the differences that differentiate us are actually rooted in the same source, you know, culturally or, you know, thematically, you know. And that's something that I'm trying to explore in the films that I'm trying to make as well. So, like, for example, in our films, my next two films, you know, both protagonists in each film are TCKs, you know. So yeah, so it's like, and the thing that I'm trying to do is like, you know, I'm trying to basically explore these tropes, you know, whether it's noir or psychological thriller, through the point of view of a transnational individual, you know. So I think hopefully that brings language, you know, gradually. I mean, obviously I'm not trying to say that I'm the pioneer, but I'm hoping to see more of those stories, you know, being told over the course of time. That's it.
Yeah, I think the thing is that with one of the best thing about time is that it changes. Nowadays we see a lot of things that was in the past, maybe we call it, oh, it's okay, you know, it's just a stereotype kind of thing. But the thing is that we have gradually moved on, is that there's a progression to that, and I always believe that TCK could play a part with it. Like recently, I actually I actually forwarded Ben and I actually was watching some ESPN video of a guy called Stephen A. Smith, who has built a reputation for over a decade of using reverse racism to protect his job. And recently, he criticized a Japanese Major League Baseball player, Shohei Ohtani, who actually performed a feat that has not been done since Babe Ruth for over 100 years. And what's beautiful about seeing that is that all the ones who criticize him is actually not just an Asian. There's actually a combination of people of all ethnicity who actually criticize him for it. And in fact, I saw there's one comment, I am ashamed that you are born to a black community. So that's his personal thing. But the thing is that it's really heartening to see that. And I really hope that TCK, in a sense, could advocate that, is because, well, we live a life whereby we always see life from two sides of the coin. So now let's find it as a way. Maybe this could be my last question for you guys, is that what outlets or what facilitation do you guys feel could be done in order to make intercultural communication, acceptance of diversity as a hard skill? Because a lot of times people tend to focus on just things that, oh, this is just a soft skill anyway. So we need to focus on things that is supposed to be more labor related. So what do you guys feel though that this could be brought to a forefront to make people understand the importance of it?
I think the fact that we're just simply talking about it, starting a conversation, right? That's the biggest. Again, I keep going back to this old man thing. I'm not that old. I feel like compared to you guys, but you know, when I first came back, it was 90. Some of you weren't even born yet, but 93, and there was just no discussion.
I was just born.
There you go. Yeah, congrats, man. Yeah, there was just no discussion of it, and it wasn't necessarily a taboo topic. I think it was still pretty fresh. Not that, you know, this was a brand new thing. There've been TCKs forever, right? So it's not, but I just think the fact that we're finally conversing, you know, there's so much out there, you know, whether it's this show or whether it's, you know, other podcasts or films or books or, you know, everything. Just, I love the fact that we're just simply talking about this, you know, and I think getting that conversation started, excuse me, is the starting point. You know, and I it's refreshing for someone like me who went so many years thinking I was so alone, and it turns out I wasn't, obviously, right? So just, you know, Calvin, what you're doing, what everybody else on here is doing, the fact that we're simply having this conversation is a starting point, which I love. So from my perspective, you know, so drop the mic. Am I walking off? Like, what? Go quiet. So.
Just wanted to say, Ben, I get you, man. I feel old in this company. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, so since I help out with like the online third culture community, so there's been many times where I've got messages from like older TCKs who are like thanks for doing what you're doing and like keep up the good work and like providing a space, because yeah, like oftentimes it is lonely growing up as a third culture kid if you don't know that you are one, or you realize you are one, but it seems like everybody around you is not a third culture kid either, or you feel like you're going on this journey alone. But it's been really great to like see all like these resources like podcasts like Daniel's and like Calvin's popping up, and hearing all the diverse conversations about what it means to be a third culture kid. As a third culture kid is like very like welcoming and feels like a homecoming in a way, if that makes sense. To hear other people talk about their experiences, and it's, I don't know, I feel like just hearing other third culture kids talk about like their experiences has made me feel more I think comfortable in the identity, and also I don't know, feel like, yeah, I'm not alone. So it's like it's really been great that there's been more discussion, and I think that's also a reflection of like as the world kind of comes closer through technology. That's probably like the result of it. Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, right? That hasn't changed. It doesn't matter where you're from, where you're born, where you've traveled to. All cultures want the same. You just want to be loved, and you want the best for your kids and your family and things like that. And it's sad that we tend to get away from that. We're a lot more alike than we are different, and that's something I think I learned as a TCK more than anything. I, like many of you, I grew up overseas at such a young age. I didn't know any different, but I got lucky in a sense that my parents never, there's this thing, white privilege, all that stuff. Yeah, I guess so. I didn't realize it at the time. I never thought of myself that way, but yeah, of course there's a sense of that, but it was never instilled that we were better or worse than anybody. I had parents that just said, look, you're in someone else's country, you're in someone else's culture. It's how they do things. It's not wrong at all. But you're going to acclimate and adapt to that, not the other way around. I know that's not always the case, and I'm not saying I, pat myself on the back and I'm better than anybody, but it's just I got lucky in a sense that I was exposed to so much at such a young age. I don't know any different, and so I think that is a hard part about being back in the States. And there's obviously I'm American, proud of it. Wouldn't change that, but I think that's where maybe it's my own intrinsic walls that I build up, because I see the world one way and not everybody here sees it that way, and so there is that intrinsic conflict, right? So again, it's not better or worse. I don't want to put myself on a pedestal like TCKs or everything. We're way up here. It's not. I don't view it that way at all. I'm very lucky. I think that's how I view the experience. So never saw it as a white privilege thing, but I guess it was in a way, right? And I have no business talking about the Asian hate stuff, and yet I'm very culturally sensitive. It pisses me off when I see stuff like that going on. But I don't want to be, as a white guy, I don't want to be like try to be the voice and all that, because it's not my business. But it is my business to defend things that I see wrong, right? So anyway, that's my 2 cents. So
I really like what you added, because I feel like a lot of times what we really need, like, it doesn't really matter if it's a topic of culture or just any other topic. What we really need is to have an open mindset and to really embrace different things that are perhaps new, that are different. For example, being from multiple cultural backgrounds and approaching it from somebody who is a monocultural person, right? So embracing that and understanding that, I'm open to that, and I won't discriminate or box you in or stereotype you based on that simple fact. And I'm curious as well, curious to learn more about it, and understanding what I could do from my position to learn more about it, to help others perhaps understand it after I've understood it myself, and then trying to then engage in conversations like this. And for me, one thing that I really believe is so powerful is storytelling as a way to transmit your messages, to transmit your experiences, and to connect across cultures. And a little plug here, by the way, is I've been working on a startup actually, and it's actually for that purpose, because I realize the importance of stories and how it can connect people across cultures, across different backgrounds, and doing that and sharing your experiences to have a greater understanding for each other, but also for yourself, and realizing and reflecting on what are the simple things or events that happened to me or to others that actually impacted me or my personality. And so, by the way, I have a startup called Raw Culture, which is working on that and creating a platform for third culture kids specifically to engage in stories and exchange and have this support community, especially during their young adolescent years, where you really try to grow your identity and recognize who you are. And when you have this support community at your side, I would imagine it will be much more easier for you to find yourself and, realize there's 1,000 or a million, not a million people who are like you out there, and you're not alone in your step of finding yourself, period.
Yeah. We shall visit it.
Yeah, good plug. I like that. Yeah.
It's a great plug. I want to check it out.
I'll do a solo episode with you, Weirong, another time, okay? I'll do a solo episode with you next time, Weirong. All right, Celine, anything?
Pretty much just exactly what you all have already said. So, like, I know So from my perspective, like I'm relatively new to being a TCK. Like I've been one my entire life pretty much, but like I've only had the vocabulary to express that for maybe a year or so. And I feel like as more and more TCKs like find themselves and share that, like on social media, for example, that's going to bring about more of an identity revolution, I guess, than previous generations could have imagined without the concept of the internet. I don't know. Maybe that's just Zoomer thinking.
But you got a really unique angle because you grew up on a boat.
Yeah.
That's that's like Waterworld, you know. It's awesome, you know. So
Tony, she's too young for that movie.
Geeky reference.
I'll just smile and nod like I understand. Yep.
Tony, I totally understood that, so don't worry about it. Yeah,
I did too. I saw it in the cinema.
Yeah, see here. I think it's a great film.
But
it's a dumb film, but I loved it.
But speaking of stories,
we're joking aside. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, Tony, you go.
No, but seriously, yeah, that's a wonderful perspective to put out. So you write. Sorry, are you writing anything about that? Novelizing it or yeah?
I mean, I'm kind of sort of waiting until I'm more solidified in who I am as a TCK. But at the moment, I am working on a blog that's just going to be like short stories and like.
Instead of fresh off the boat, it's bro on the boat.
Literally, yeah.
If you ever write a book, you know if you ever write a book, we're all waiting.
Can I just ask a quick question? I think it's ironic. How many of us are actually writers?
To a degree.
That's just it's interesting to me.
I wrote articles. That's how I actually started doing this.
Putting words on paper. Yeah, you're good. It's just interesting that a lot of TCKs I know are definitely writers. So it's anyway, just something.
No, that illustrates Fish's point. You know that I think it's we've got stories to tell.
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
So many, And
I always say that the 3 best ways to bond people is story, food, and shared tragedy. And as a bonus, in case some of you are raising teenagers, you guys have a lot of things to talk about that you can bond off. So
put those 3 together, you have a party.
Hey.
But speaking of storytelling, there was one of those actually facets of open-mindedness is just the being open-minded to people's experiences and how people's experiences can be different. I had a strange experience it was like 10 years ago or something, where I jumped on a video call of mostly US based people, and they were all just conversing, and then and then came around and I introduced myself, and at the time I was living in Malaysia and on a bit of a journey of my own. And
oh wow, okay.
And Tony, you're ready. But the story has nothing to do with Malaysia. The story has to do with the fact that the host of the call I think in response to my telling my story, she, I think, just on a whim decided to play a practical joke of saying like, oh, well, I'm actually living in Nairobi, Kenya, because my parents are whatever. And I was just like, sure, I've known people like that. It's probably, tell me about it.
Is she a Kenyan princess? Is she a Kenyan princess?
Hey, not all African countries are the same. Calvin. But what I'm saying is that for her, my experience, it sounded so outlandish that for her, her immediate response was like, sure, you live in Malaysia. I live in Kenya, which was, she was probably pulling my leg. But it was just interesting that this was the response that like, oh, I can't even imagine of people having these kinds of lives, even though every day we obviously we all do. And I think the more we talk about it and the more we have these sort of platforms to tell our stories, thank you everybody, it normalizes it, and it helps make that something that everybody can accept and assume like, oh yeah, sure you can have a crazy life experience, world experience, anything can happen. So yeah.
All right, guys. I'm just gonna wrap it up with. So I just want to wrap it up with one question for you guys, and that is on gratitude. What are you guys most thankful for having this life as a TCK, or it could be anything that could be non-TCK related, but as maybe has helped you guys to adjust to it a lot better. So yeah.
I think just being
I
able
think I'm
to
gonna.
oh, sorry.
Oh no, you first, man.
I was just gonna say, I mentioned this earlier. I just feel lucky. It comes back to lucky. Not better, not worse. It was just my experience. And I'm incredibly lucky to have seen and done so many things at such a young age. Now, obviously, as we all can, probably attribute to, it complicates life a little bit, right? But I wouldn't trade it for anything. The friendships I've made, I mean, I don't know about you guys. I still talk to people that I grew up with from my Hong Kong and Taiwan days, and I was 7 when I met them. I still have great relationships, great conversations. I have the Taipei group that I graduated with, that I spent a long time with when I was in Taipei. I look forward to those phone calls. I look forward to those Zoom meetings, and it's funny, we haven't physically been around each other in many, many years, but we pick up right where we left off. And it's the value of friendship that I gained by being a TCK and meeting people like you guys. I don't have to explain myself. You guys get it without, an hour-long conversation diving into, okay, no, I didn't live in California. Taipei is not in California. Let's get, but it's just lucky. It all comes back to being lucky. Not better, not worse, but just luck, and I wouldn't change it for anything. So
yeah, I was gonna echo you there. I feel the same way, especially since how I got thrown into that situation in the first place was it came from the ashes of bad luck. Mm-hmm. Broken family, single parent. I won't get into too much of the drama of it, but essentially, it was from circumstances that were less than favorable, but then it changed, when we had this new life, with my new dad, stepdad, in other words. And from there, everything just became, worlds away from the way I started, and I would say that luck had a lot to do with it. So I look at it as good fortune, that I was able to be thrust into this kind of condition that we all share, and as you said, it's in no way does it make me feel, loftier or better than anybody, but it does make me feel different in a positive way. Mm-hmm. And it's gratifying to know that, I'm not alone in that, obviously, being connected with my old friends, remind me of that, even though I'm kind of like my own island, my own entity right now in KL. Not many people like me right now in KL, few here and there, but maintaining that connection is, I think, one of the magical things about having grown up as a transnational person. So yeah, fortunate.
Tony, I need to move to KL because I can like you.
Bring it on. Likewise.
Just feed me, that's all.
No problem here. You could get the best cheap food, on 5 times a day, for less than $10.
All right, ladies, anyone want to chime in?
I can just say that I also, echoing everybody, saying that I feel also very privileged to be in our shoes, right? To be TCKs, because in any case, I would have wanted to travel around the world and meet different cultures anyway, but I already have that privilege. So for me, I just really enjoy that, and I'm fully trying to be present with what I already have. And also, just thinking about the awkward situations that I've been, the different cultural things I've been a part of and experiences, I think I really came out being much more flexible and adaptable than other people might be, because I've seen a lot and been through a lot as well. So that's definitely also a plus. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everybody's points too. And I think another thing is I love the fact that I can get very interested into culture, or like if people say, oh, like I'm from Europe, and I'll be like, oh, so like where? And I'll be like questioning, like getting to know them. And I like the like curiosity that we have at TCKs to know more about people, and other than like what we see, but to get to know them like as a person, like their identity. I think that's something that I think is a huge plus of the TCKs, the curiosity of learning about people, about their culture, about who they are, aside from what we might perceive or just see from like a face value, what we think they are.
Roger that.
Yeah, just coming off of like the back of what everyone else has just said, really. The fact that being a TCK comes with a lot of privilege, but I also feel like it teaches you a lot of humility because you're not growing up where people would consider it your home. You're like a representative of a place where you might not have ever lived before. And that sort of teaches you to be as inquisitive and curious and sort of, I don't know if humble's the right word, but like willing to learn and adapt to wherever you are without trying to impose your own ideas onto other people.
All right, then.
Just to finish things off, I just want to say, Calvin, right now I'm just feeling grateful for you and everybody else here. If I'm allowed to be cheesy.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, guys. So I'm just gonna wrap it up. So this is, well, as I said, this is my 100th episode, and I've been asked what I'm gonna do after this. So for the info, no, I'm not stopping this. I think if I have to have an aggregate number when I'm gonna stop, it's 195 maybe. Maybe just the reason why is because there's 195 nation under the World Charter. 193 of it is under UN, but I couldn't care less. I just want to represent all of it, and yeah, this thing is not gonna stop. But I am gonna take a short hiatus after an episode or two after this, as I want to keep on creating a content, but I do want to keep on improving what I'm doing on. So with that, this is gonna be the conclusion to the 100th episode of Global Citizens, Four Corners of the World. So I definitely want to thank each and every single one of you for making the time. Some of you are well, you guys are still in the morning actually. I know Ben just got his coffee before he started doing this.
Now. Good night. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. So yeah, this thing will be on my YouTube. It's going to be on Instagram TV, and you guys everyone here will be tagged, and hopefully we can continue doing this for, well, as much as we can. For one thing is that because we want to bring 3CK's issue to the forefront. So take care, everyone, and please take good care of yourselves, and hope that this year or next year will be a lot better for you guys, whether it's traveling or non-traveling related. Bye.
Thank you very much, Calvin. Bye.
Yeah, nice job, Calvin. Thanks, guys.